invite the next speakers to come on up. We have our executive perspectives, the Ethernet-enabled cloud ecosystem, fueling innovation, and productivity gains in the digital enterprise. Okay, so I'd like to introduce the speakers here. We have Mike Strople, president of Allstream. Welcome, Mike. Simon Spraggs from Cisco. Adan from Ericsson. Don MacNeil from XO. And Ben Edmond from Global Capacity. We have a lot of experience here on this panel, and I'm really excited the opportunity for us to have this discussion about the shape of the ecosystem. So welcome, everyone. So what we're going to do for this particular panel is we're going to walk through, each of the presenters is going to give a presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. Okay, so the topics that we're going to cover for this particular session is the paradigm shift to cloud-centric services. We'll have a discussion of the proof of concept demo with elastic bandwidth. So Mike's going to share about that demo that they have with Tata. We'll have the multi-cloud ecosystem and Ethernet's enabling role in that. Don's going to cover that. How the cloud can benefit from a more efficient connectivity market. Ben's going to cover that topic. And the changing customer expectations, increased business agility, and rethinking service innovation. Adan will deal with that topic. And then new technology innovation shaping the cloud ecosystem, which Simon will cover. So just wanted to really look at what we're talking about here in terms of the ecosystem. Mass connectivity is pretty much the driver in the global economy today. We have people, organizations, and devices all connected, and it's really the principal enabler of the shift towards the digital enterprise. You've heard companies like Gartner talk about the digital enterprise and the changes that are going on there to make the enterprises being able to offer much more responsive services to their own internal customers. And really, if you think about it, being connected is pretty much everything. We've had a lot of focus on the apps, obviously over the last 5 years or so. But if you're not connected to the network, you can't have access to the apps. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about why the network is important, and securing that network is important, and making that network available everywhere and much more dynamic is important. So if you think about it, Ethernet really is the protocol of choice when it comes to connectivity, and carrier Ethernet is the digital fuel for the information-based economies. And earlier this morning I mentioned that Ethernet has been widely adopted because of the performance price advantages. If you think about Ethernet and the innovation folks like Bob Metcalf have driven, Ethernet's innovation curve from a performance price advantage point of view is very similar to what you saw with microprocessors. So the first, say, 15 years of the Ethernet was like that. And so, it's really key for driving the digital economy and accelerating communications-related business transformation. So what I wanted to do here is kind of put it in context. When we talk about this shift towards more cloud-centric services, we're moving from this predefined connectivity model towards a much more automated cloud-centric model. And that predefined connectivity model was characterized initially by Carrier Ethernet 1.0, in which you had services delivered over a single network. You had differentiation in the beginning around 1 gig services and eventually around 10 gigabit Ethernet unis. So speeds and fees was very much the emphasis at that time. And then we had the introduction of 2.0. And with 2.0, the differentiation options in the market were much broader. You had focus on accelerated service turnup, performance SLAs end-to-end, performance visibility, expanded service coverage. These are ways in which operators have been differentiating their services over the last 3 years or so. And then, of course, the introduction of 100 gig waves and 100 gig unis and so on. And really what we're talking about now is moving towards that next level of innovation in terms of service options, that cloud-centric environment that's enabled by LSO that Nan talked about, NFV and SDN riding on top of Carrier Ethernet and optical technology, a much more agile, assured, and orchestrated services environment. And these are just some of the examples of the types of services that will be available in this environment. Dynamic capacity, manual and threshold type of driven capacity, API performance on demand, and so on. So we'll get into some of these during the discussion here. But with that, I just want to go ahead and stop here and then hand it over to Mike, who will share with us some examples of the types of innovation we can expect. So Mike, here you go.
Great. Thanks, Stan. Bob spoke this morning about numbering networks, and that perhaps the third network was actually the 237th. I wanted to point out that Gen 14 might not as accurately portray that this is in fact the inaugural event of this kind, and wanted to give real congratulations to Nan, Kevin, Stan, and all of your teams who've put on what is really an outstanding inaugural event.
Thank you.
Allstream is Canada's communications provider exclusively focused on serving businesses. Data networking for businesses is what we do at Allstream. And businesses today are increasingly global, whether they're in resources or retail, whether they're in transportation or technology. They're spanning larger geographies, and indeed they're spanning communications carriers. More and more businesses are requiring faster and faster networks as they adapt to a changing market. And whether that's driven by the need for collaboration, integrated logistics, or in fact, the more recently, cloud-based services. Global businesses are looking for an assured and secured network solution that can be provided across multiple carriers. That's one of the areas that is particularly of interest to Allstream, is not just providing that secured and assured networks on one network, but rather on networks across multiple carriers. Since the inception of the Metro Ethernet Forum, MEF has been delivering the promise of ubiquity through industry cooperation and standardization. And while we've been active participating in the technical committees of the Metro Ethernet Forum, just as important is the participation in the not-so-new service operations committees, where we deal with the most important issue of service orchestration, and in fact, orchestration across carriers. It's not just about delivering that outstanding experience on one carrier. In fact, it's about being able to deliver that experience globally. So we're extremely pleased today to be demonstrating our proof of concept on Elastic Ethernet, and we're doing that with our partner Tata Communications. And while it's not the first implementation or proof of concept, or in fact deployment of bandwidth on demand, we are very excited to actually be doing it based on MEF standards, on open standards, and look forward to showing that to all of you a little bit later this afternoon. That's one part of our commitment to developing solutions that realize the vision of the agile, orchestrated network across multiple carriers. And when you do get a chance to see the demonstration a little later today, you'll see what we have done and where we're taking provisioning times that we have moved already from weeks to days, and envisioning taking those days, in fact, down to minutes and indeed seconds. We're very excited to be part of this dynamic and changing industry, and look forward to talking more about it today and in the days to come. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Well, good morning, Don MacNeil. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at XO Communications, and this morning I just wanted to share a few thoughts with regard to the Ethernet-enabled cloud ecosystem as it pertains from the perspective of a service provider. So XO Communications has the advantage of serving both enterprises as well as carriers, mobile operators, and content providers. So you're sitting in that interesting space where you're able to see enterprise adoption of this thing called the cloud, and then equally seeing what some of our competitors are doing in the space as well, provides that unique advantage to start to provide what I believe is a good solid roadmap that we've all ventured on, and start to provide some characteristics of what will make a successful cloud ecosystem. So first and foremost, whatever your definition of cloud is, and there are many, clearly there are varying degrees of adoption, but more importantly, I think there are common themes with regard to, hey, why isn't it going quicker? there are clearly things that are going quicker and some that are not so much. One of the easy ones that gets talked about a lot is security. And I think notwithstanding security and regulation, that is absolutely important. But I think the ones that, from a service provider perspective, we can impact in a positive way is in the case of performance, and as well, this whole idea of being able to provide integration. Mike just mentioned this whole notion of assured reach. You hear lots of recurring characteristics, but I believe this is the great opportunity for service providers to step back, think about what our customers need, and address those two important areas of concern. And to that point, what I believe is a strong foundation that allows all of this to go forward is this whole notion of a wide area network based on multi-protocol label switching, MPLS, as well as combined with Ethernet access. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, because oftentimes you hear MPLS and Ethernet in competition with one another, whereas I believe the strong foundation that will enable this idea of a cloud ecosystem, whatever that means to a specific enterprise or business, the foundation is what's most important, and it's most important for us as service providers to get right. So if you think about anything in life, choice is good. I think as service providers entered into this whole world of cloud, there was this whole notion of reconstituting the place that we came from, which was this whole idea of being proprietary. So for those who are familiar with voice technology, if you think about it, back in the good old days, you bought a PBX and you got to pick either a Lucent handset or a Nortel handset. Well, unfortunately, those two companies in particular have, morphed into many things, some not even existing anymore. But what it taught us was this whole notion of being proprietary doesn't work. And as you look into the future, and we think about standards-based, which we think about the MEF as providing a valid and viable forum for that, having strong standards and having flexibility and having choice is absolutely essential to what it is we call the cloud ecosystem going forward. So I would characterize this whole idea of, again, a strong network-based foundation allows that choice, allows the ability for enterprises to pick the best athlete. There are clearly going to be some choices where cloud providers, or said another way, platform as a service providers, software as a service providers. It should be the ability for the CIO or the IT staff to pick and have choice. And that, from the perspective of XO, we believe is the right direction. Therefore, prescribing specific applications or software packages is really not the place we want to play in. Our goal is really to play in the space of providing that network-based foundation to allow that choice. So ideally, if you build on that choice, what are the potential outcomes? Well, Gartner talks a lot about this whole idea now of hybrid IT. Or said another way, I think something that we all want from our IT organizations, and that is listen to what we as internal customers want, listen to what we need, and more importantly, work with us. And clearly, the IT organizations, in some cases, get pinned in or get fenced in a little bit with regard to limited budgets, limited ability to deviate from regulations, or in some cases just personal preference. But by starting off on a path where the foundation is strong, the foundation is flexible, and more importantly, these wide area networks provide choice, whether it be not only going to your own private data center, but having the ability to go to the public data centers where you could find direct connections to Amazon or Microsoft or Google, starts to provide the platform for the IT organization to deliver on its promise to its internal customers and really start to differentiate the business. So as I said before, clearly choice is good, choice is what we all want, and more importantly, choice allows the best platform, the best software package to deliver on the best option for the business. Where does Ethernet fit in? As I said at the beginning, I believe wide area networks with Ethernet access is definitely a great complement to this whole idea of an Ethernet-enabled cloud ecosystem. Already we've seen in just in the last 5 years, and it's been that long, last mile Ethernet access has really begun again, from a service provider perspective, to disrupt legacy models, specifically network architectures, streamlining, making things easy. Unfortunately today, service providers are tasked with having to maintain one foot in the past, TDM infrastructure, and at the same time continuing to invest in Ethernet architectures. So we see the future. Unfortunately, the pace at which the market is moving isn't to our exact liking, but recognizing that the pace is necessary because everybody is in a different place with regard to their adoption and their emerging models. It's important as service providers to maintain that choice. Secondly is pricing. You're seeing more and more in a cost per bit, Ethernet is delivering a better value. It certainly comes, again, with that investment, with that opportunity, but it's undoubted now that Ethernet will overtake, as we're seeing every day. The Ethernet last mile access connections are outpacing TDM on a monthly basis, at least as it pertains to XO. So you certainly can see the investments are paying off. And then finally, one of the great things, again, I give a lot of credit to the MEF. I also give some kudos to companies like Synchronos that are really allowing all of the hard lessons we've learned with regard to last mile access and the ability to order service, we've kept up with. We haven't made excuses because it's new, it's going to be hard, it's going to be different, it's going to be easier. That said, one of the things that the market does need to understand is that as more and more Ethernet is deployed, it isn't the same as delivering a T1 over copper. The notion of a 30-day delivery cycle is not correct. As you begin to get above 20 megs, in my opinion, you're really looking at a fiber-based solution. And if your building does not have fiber in it, which most don't, you will have to make investments. You'll have to make investments in your telco closet, or the building owner will have to make investments in the main point of entry. What are those investments? It's different levels of power. It's different levels of connectivity. So again, I would advise for those who are in the market making that transition, look in your telco closet. Is it there? And set your own proper expectations that digging up the street, dealing with moratoriums and dealing with permitting is tough stuff. So the notion of a 30-day cycle, until you have a building that has fiber connectivity and capability, isn't going to happen. So if that would be my one public service announcement for the day from a service provider perspective, just be a part of the solution and really set your own expectations. And then finally, as I said, you see a lot of either or. Is it Ethernet or is it MPLS? I would submit to you that a wide area network based on MPLS with Ethernet access as the last mile provides and affords you the greatest level of opportunity to get to that point where your foundation is strong, your foundation will provide you choice, and most importantly, it'll allow you the ability to scale your business, whether that be with a private cloud or a public cloud, or whatever the cloud ecosystem delivers in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, and thank you, Stan. Thank you, Nan. This is a fantastic event for the inaugural MEF conference here. A very nice job. We appreciate the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm going to talk about market efficiency with a Ethernet-enabled cloud, the benefits the market will have with increased efficiencies, and talk about a few different perspectives, both from the network perspective as well as the customer perspective. So what is the cloud? You know, it's many different definitions, but when I step back and look at it, it really comes down to a simple concept. You know, historically, the applications and the compute power, the storage resources sat within the four walls of where the users were. So the local area network really was the orchestration engine to connect user to what they needed to do for their business. The reality is that application, that compute resource, is shifting to the four walls of the data center. Some call it cloud, some call it hosted, some call it data center. You know, however you look at it, the four walls where the compute resources are now sitting don't house the users. And that paradigm shift is causing dramatic change within our industry, and a change that creates an opportunity for the network providers out there in the market. The reality that you need to connect those users back into the compute resources, back into where the storage networks are, back into where the compute resources are. And the reality is that businesses need to have an added context that those users are not necessarily just sitting in the same four walls. Increasingly, they're more geographically dispersed. Increasingly, they're mobile plus stationary. So it's that context to now what we're dealing with in the cloud ecosystem and really how it interacts with network. So when we think about the ecosystem, we really break the cloud ecosystem into a number of different parts. The infrastructure layer, the platform as a service, and the application. To us, at Global Capacity, really the world is driven by that application layer. We are the enablers in the network side of the equation for presenting the application, but no one raises their hand to get a gig E just to have a gig E. They raise their hand because they have an application driving that requirement wherever they are. And in the context of the ecosystem, we need to understand how to present to Nan's earlier comments, to the comments on from Bob, we need to present the right resources at the right time to enable that application and user experience. So what does this mean? What it means to us, with compute moving away from where the users are sitting, the network becomes more important than ever. The network becomes the key enabler of that user experience. But there's a couple fundamental problems. As a customer of services, of applications of network out there, no one provider owns network everywhere. And therefore, the concept of the third network with a standards-based approach for the industry to work together is one that resonates very well with me. And one that resonates very well with, I think, with most of the service providers up there. We need to work together to deliver on that customer experience in a consistent way. Users are increasingly global. It is not a world that's defined into a local market anywhere. The ubiquity of how the world operates and the need to interact with service providers and customers across the globe is an increasing reality. A couple of the other challenges with what it means to the industry to have networks so dependent on the delivery of application is that buying network is not a singular process. If I buy network one way, the same speed, the same technology, Ethernet, I can actually consume that in multiple different ways that have advantages and disadvantages. And that presents challenges for the customer, but also opportunities. And when we step back at it, the reality that no one service provider is going to build everywhere, no one's going to raise the $2 to $3 trillion to deploy fiber infrastructure at every business location. And there's already 12,000 network owners and operators out there in the global market, 2,500 just in the US alone. That market has deployed capital, and we need to more intelligently consume that capital that's deployed. So the market is the better answer. Market is the way to solve the problem of how do I get the right network to the right customer at the right location to consume the right application, but with a few caveats. And the caveats are the current framework of Ethernet, while the MEF has done a fantastic job of bringing us forward into a conversation around simplicity and standards and how we interoperate and define the market, the reality of the execution of the market is there's still differences. There's differences in standard MTU sizes. There's differences in the SLAs. There's differences in the service delivery processes. There's differences in the oversubscription policies, the actual agreements, the pricing structures, the network monitoring and repair processes. All these differences create confusion and challenges for the consumers of network and application that our collective audience has an opportunity to help solve, within the framework of the MEF and outside in the commercial relationships that we each develop to execute on the mission of delivering for our customers. And outside of the differences, there's also some market challenges around the realities of economics. If a single customer goes out to market and buys 100 megs, on average, you'll see it at $1,000, we'll say. The reality of the economics of network, 200 megs is not $2,000, but it's rather a small step function of $1,250 as an example. There's benefit from scale within the network business. And trying to piece together the market for a 300 location customer and use the individual service providers in each and every one, there is no benefit from that customer from scale. Also, how you buy network when you're trying to connect back to the cloud application matters. If you're buying a point-to-point circuit and you're cross-connecting through a data center and you're buying a standalone link to connect to AWS or Microsoft Azure, the economics are structured one way, and you're paying for the cross-connects, you're paying for that dedicated bandwidth. Virtualizing that connection through an hub and end link allows you to have a more efficient design in some cases and might be the right alternative. It's this decision process that creates opportunity, but also creates challenges in the market when things aren't done from a systematic and an intelligence-based inside the software. What the market is looking for, what we see in the market, is a desire for simplicity. And the simplicity to have the market solved through open standards, through defined processes, through an interconnected state already defined, so that virtualized on-demand resource can be there for the customer and the application. When we look at the ecosystem is very complex. But at the end of the day, we can simplify it. The enterprise, the business customers, the consumer, that we're all here to serve and serve intelligently. Whoever controls the end user relationship, really at the end of the day, doesn't matter as much as understanding that there is a business customer trying to connect users to applications. On the one side is the destinations, and those destinations are the Amazon Web Services, the Microsoft Azures, but also specialty applications that are increasingly moving out of proprietary code and into the cloud or hosted data centers. It's also the data centers themselves, the Equinix facilities for backup and access and additional disaster recovery capabilities. It's the content providers, the VoIP fabric. All these are applications being consumed by the businesses. And the execution side is the networks. And in the US alone, there's 902 local exchange carriers still. There's 1,264 cable companies with network infrastructure still in the US. 452 competitive fiber providers. There's a lot of infrastructure that's been deployed to help the marketplace deliver the bandwidth, the scale, and execution capability back to the consumers of that, the actual customers of the businesses. So we think at Global Capacity, and share a lot of the comments earlier, that simplicity and the world is quickly moving to an IT network convergence around software. And it's up to us as a service provider and challenge the industry as a whole to continue to open up through APIs, through automation, and through intelligence. We've invested over $100 million in our stack and continue to open up APIs, not just in the upfront pricing process to identify, is there Ethernet available at a location in the first place? What is it? What are the choices associated with it? Can I order it? Place the order? Inventory, billing, repair, and really understand how to automate and intelligently manage the entire stack. And as more and more service providers move through this equation, we have an opportunity to really fulfill the opportunity with the customer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Adan Pope, and I'm the CTO of Ericsson's Business Unit Support Solutions. Ericsson's a large company, so we have to sort of define which organization we're from. Support Solutions really is associated with all of the non-networking software of the business that we do. And, Ericsson's involved in many things, and I have to say I felt some trepidation coming to the Ethernet forum as the software guy focused on OSS, BSS, media, and charging, but I hear a lot of common requirements from the speakers today and a lot of concern around operations considerations around this service, and we would say that those considerations really are true for any service that a service providers are looking to deploy. we at Ericsson talk a lot about the network society. I know that was referenced in one of the presenters earlier today, but if we think about it, yesterday, the network society was really mostly about more users, serving more users. Today, it's really about serving more user needs. When we speak about the network society, we talk about 50 billion connected, 50 billion connections by the year 2020. I think more than even the connections themselves is the services that are provided by all these connections, services that are useful, that are valuable, that are personalized, that people are willing to pay for ultimately. And that places a lot of requirement on, of course, networking infrastructure technologies like Metro Ethernet and others, but also the operational support systems, billing support systems, care systems, because frankly, today we generally don't sell one service. We sell packages of services in combination with each other that provide some usable, reasonable value for a customer. That creates a lot of expectations. I think, again, when we say network society, it's easy to sort of think about this theory of everything that usefully could be connected would be. But we think that the network society really isn't some theoretical maximum here. It's really contemporary culture. We all in this room are part of the network society, and I can guarantee you, for those who have children and grandchildren, they are definitely part of the network society. And I learn every day from my daughter of the new applications that she's using that really are quite advanced. We as a society demand simplicity. I'm carrying an iPad, probably a lot of you are as well. I like it because it's simple. The ability to be able to receive some network value or network services in a simple, orchestrated, controlled, and flexible manner is driven by this move toward a network society user that has these expectations. Ultimately, as service providers, we think, and even for ourselves, Ericsson operates 1 billion users on behalf of service providers globally for mobile infrastructure or mobile services. We think ourselves and for our customers, they're trying to get to business agility. They're trying to get this perfect combination of customer agility with service agility and network agility. And as I said, Metro Ethernet's moving in the perfect direction toward network agility, but ultimately to create business agility for ourselves as operators and for yourselves as operators as well. And of course, as an industry, we're trying to create that value in network agility, SDN, NFV. We're all focused on that for sure. But in the end, it's the customer value that we're all driving toward. And I think, again, if we look at it from that point of view, we now have a different set of considerations when we talk about operational support systems and billing support systems. In this chart, maybe a little complicated, if you look at on the left-hand side, the elements of innovation are really that perfect combination between real-time network service delivery, and I think Ethernet is going in that direction in a great way, but of course so is mobile and IP, combined with OSS, BSS capabilities and functions. And I don't think the role of OSS, BSS ever really goes away. I think it changes. And I think to the previous speaker's point, we have a lot of infrastructure deployed over a very long period of time that, let's face it, we probably won't virtualize. We'll probably need to find a way to utilize that. Maybe we'll utilize it in a similar manner as our SDN controlled or our NFV controlled networks. Maybe we'll find a way to wrap and orchestrate the traditional provisioning systems that we have. But we think that one of the key capabilities of being able to do that and to be able to combine this both real-time and non-real-time networking capability and service delivery capability is to have an enterprise-wide catalog approach. So if we move to sort of the characteristics of what that would be, in the middle, a real-time and traditional OSS BSS stack that combines the best of both based on an enterprise-wide product and service and resource catalog. That allows us to do things like define services by service components and products by services and service components and ultimately resources, and mix and match those in the appropriate ways to deliver the services that we ultimately want to sell on to our customers. Of course, we need to have some collaboration framework because I think a lot of folks have mentioned today as carriers, we want to sell with other carriers. We want to collaborate and orchestrate services across boundaries of countries and of enterprises. We want to have some unified exposure for that, and standards would be a great way to start. We want to be able to have customer self-care and consumer and enterprise self-care portals, because we as consumers, we really appreciate the services that we ourselves can manage ourselves, that we can deliver, we can create and deliver as much as we can the value ourselves. We don't want to call the call center, wait for a 30-day cycle to create a new service and what have you. And that clearly places a key requirement in orchestration and settlement, more so than ever before. And if we were able to look at our OSS and BSS infrastructure in this way, we can refactor a lot of the value that we have in the traditional OSSs that we have implemented already. We can introduce a catalog-driven approach for cross OSS and cross-service orchestration, fulfillment, assurance. And if we look at it from a process point of view first, we think that that's where the majority of the value can really be generated. So, catalog-driven, fundamental key value propositions of taking this approach, reusable service components. There are many things in our network that can provide connectivity, many network services that can do. Today, increasingly, we want more real-time, we want more elastic, we want more on-demand services. But we also recognize that we have to manage, monitor, and support TDM infrastructure for quite some time. So we have this need for componentizing the network capabilities we have and the service capabilities, and being able to then mix and match them in an orchestrated manner. We think that federation, and providing a consistent view internally for ourselves and externally to our partners is absolutely critical. And that will allow us to take a catalog-driven order orchestration process, if you will, for the fulfillment of today's services and the services of the future. That's really a big mouthful, but I guess on the questions and answers, we can get to some of that. Thank you.
Right, I'm the last to go. My name's Simon Spraggs. Let's just go. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the technology innovations to enable the Ethernet-enabled cloud. I'd put to you that the things that service providers need to be looking at today are OpEx reduction, revenue growth, and agility. I'm going to talk about some of the components that are required to achieve those from a technology perspective. So the first things first, carrier Ethernet has been wildly successful in the industry. A huge amount of credit needs to go to the MEF on that basis. And if I look at how the sort of carrier Ethernet environment has evolved over the years, what we've seen is initially a setup where the service was defined at the edge, and the core, the access, and the aggregation were really left to the service provider to decide how to provide it. And what we saw in the beginning was really a hodgepodge of technologies. So we would have one technology perhaps in the access, one in the aggregation, one in the core. And as a consequence of that, the end-to-end service provisioned over the top was often really quite complicated. What we've seen over a period of time, and a lot of debate in forums such as this and other events, is we've seen a situation where over time the technology within the core, access, and aggregation has really gone over towards IP/MPLS, with the net result that we can get an end-to-end service and set up across that infrastructure. So a little bit of history. Let's now consider some of the opportunities and challenges that carrier Ethernet has. So the opportunity is quite clear. The opportunity is that carrier Ethernet is an integral part of the cloud-centric environment that has been discussed a lot today and is happening across the industry. However, there's some challenges. We have an environment which is very, very large. IP/MPLS was really designed initially for perhaps tens to hundreds of nodes, and today we see situations where some customers are working with perhaps 80,000, 90,000 devices out there. So a massive difference from the initial sort of design considerations to where we are today. Make no mistake, we can deal with them, but in dealing with them, there's a significant amount of complexity. The next thing is that the service is no longer just a carrier Ethernet service. We're in a world where carrier Ethernet is providing connectivity to perhaps a data center. Within that data center, we'll be connecting to a networking infrastructure that sits within there. And on top of that networking infrastructure, we'll either be running NFV services, infrastructure as a service services, or platform as a service type services. So the complexity of the environment is actually increased quite significantly. So just to sort of summarize, two areas. One, some technology challenges in the network space, and the other in the service control of the end-to-end environment. And we need to be thinking about both of those areas moving forward. So let's talk about the sort of end-to-end service provisioning to start with. So the traditional approach for orchestration in particular has been around for many, many years, and it has evolved. And today I would say that we see situations that are extremely monolithic in their nature, very siloed, bespoke, hard-coded, and the net result of that is that we have a very sort of small level of service agility. What we're going to see moving forward, the orchestration system needs to evolve. So some of the good news is that we're seeing protocol unification at the sort of networking layer. I guess the bad news is that we have more components to deal with. So how does the orchestration system move forward? So the first things first is that it needs to become modular. It's been mentioned many times today already that service providers do not want to have a single solution from a single vendor. They need to be able to integrate different vendors' solutions together. So modularity is key. APIs, models between those components is also key. What we see in terms of the orchestration environment is components that actually control different parts of the environment. So there will be domain controllers associated with the data center. There will be domain controllers associated with the wide area, perhaps the aggregation, perhaps the CPE devices out there. That will be held together with a cross-domain orchestration function. What I haven't shown here is the user portal and the catalogs that sit above that, but that is a critical component in building an agile service environment in that the users can actually use the portals, they can see what services are available to them, and as a consequence, select the services they want, and then through cross-domain orchestration, through the domain controllers, go and provision the end-to-end service. How is this going to be done? It's going to be done using models. So at the top, we will have end-to-end service models. So what does the service look like? It's not going to be a piece of CLI or anything like that. It's going to be, I need a layer 2 service from point A to point B with the right QoS characteristics, etc. That will go down through the orchestration environment to a set of workflows that will ultimately hit the devices themselves, either through specific interfaces to those devices or through models directly to the devices, so using technologies such as netconf and Yang. In terms of the network, and I'm talking here specifically about the carrier Ethernet network. So the first piece that's pretty important is programmability. What does programmability give you? It gives us service agility. We continue to need to support the MEF standards that are coming out. So as MEF builds new solutions and standards, they need to be implemented on the UNI and the NNIs of the network. I put to you that MPLS actually does a pretty good job in providing both layer 2 services and layer 3 services. And what I would suggest to you is that MPLS is actually a pretty good data plane for the support of carrier Ethernet services. So we get investment protection there. What we do need to do, though, with MPLS is actually simplify some of the protocols associated with the building of the end-to-end connections. So there's some work going on in the IETF at the moment called segment routing that is aiming to, or is, reducing the number of protocols that are required to build an end-to-end connection, and at the same time providing the capabilities that we have today. So shortest path routing and also traffic engineering capability. Add that or add SDN control to that, then we have a simpler environment to create the end-to-end connections. Config management. Config management is extremely important as we move out towards the edge. We need to be able to reduce the number of truck rolls, touches that the end users make to build the service. So the ability to do zero-touch provisioning, the ability to build the network automatically is very key at that part of the network. And then lastly, IP and optical integration. By taking the two components, the IP layer and the optical layer, we have an opportunity to create a more efficient environment than just treating the two components separately. So, to summarize, carrier Ethernet and carrier Ethernet services have been hugely important. Success of those services brings some opportunities and challenges. Hopefully I've outlined some of the things that Cisco and the industry generally are doing to address those challenges to enable basically carrier Ethernet to be an integral part of a cloud-enabled environment. Thank you very much.
What I wanted to do now is just to walk through a few questions with the speakers here. And the first one I wanted to start with is, you know, we put up the slides about this transition towards more dynamic services. And what I wanted to do is to get your opinions on when these new types of dynamic services are available. Mike, you have the demo dealing with your elastic bandwidth. I'm kind of curious, what do you think in terms of the timing for things like you know, dynamic capacity being commonly available across the market, automated end-to-end provisioning, application-aware networking, et cetera. And maybe we could get the opinions of each of the speakers up here.
Sure. So with any technology like this or any desire, we always tend to maybe overestimate the short term and underestimate the impacts in the long term. So in a lot of cases, I might predict it would be sooner than it actually is. But what I'd predict is that when it does happen, it is going to happen very quickly and very profoundly. Some of the factors to consider about when it will happen, one is the demand remains still fragmented. And what I mean by that is, well, customers know that they conceptually want orchestrated and faster and automated. They're not yet able to express exactly what that is, why that is, and as a result, you get at least one opinion or two or three opinions. And without that concentrated cohesive demand, it becomes very difficult for an operator or operators to decide on how to implement something. Proprietary implementations are good steps and good ways forward, but they don't bring an industry consensus together. And that's one of the great things about the standardization work, is that the underlying standards, while not being too prescriptive, to the extent that they facilitate the industry to deliver solutions like these. We're making steps forward. But the reality is that when you're dealing with carriers, you're dealing with big companies, long-rooted in measuring things in days and weeks, and thinking moving to days is great, when in fact the goal actually has to be moving to seconds. So there's still a long way to go inside, even once you get the cohesive demand for exactly what it is. Only then will it really turn into a clear solution inside of, and it's service providers, plural, not one.
Okay, very good.
I would just offer, so over the summer we built on the natural capabilities inherent with VPLS and MPLS, kind of stealing a page from traditional high-speed internet, and that is the ability to burst. And if you take that as kind of the starting point and put the appropriate commercial terms around it, namely, hey, what do you pay when you burst? And secondly, can I have assured class of service or when I do burst and when I need to burst? So we rolled out what we called our bandwidth on demand and focused on the high data or high traffic locations, namely public and private data centers, and really focused at 1 gig and 10 gig line rates, simply because, you know, if you find yourself in that situation, the need for unpredictable bandwidth, more than likely you're already a large bandwidth user. So no magic to it. It's just really the way the networks always have worked. And then really putting the right commercial terms to provide customers the confidence that I'm not going to change the rate when I do burst. And of course, the laws of physics apply, and that is, you know, once the line rate is met, then the line rate is met. Then you need another bigger pipe, which, you know, you can provide. So we call that bandwidth on demand, as opposed to some of the notions of scheduling where you go into a website and you ask or you submit an order. But you know, that's one of the beauties of Ethernet, and that's one of the beauties of layer 2 and layer 3 services, is that once the foundation is laid, be it the fiber and then be it the appropriate transport path and the transport gear, the notion of flexibility is inherent.
Okay.
I would just add, I think the notion of resource allocation in real time or as close to real time is already being done in some small instances out in the industry, you know, concentrated around data centers or application-rich environments to allow people to log in and get the resources they want in a fixed bandwidth. You know, the dynamic nature of the bandwidth, I think, you know, what Don's done and a few others is still relatively immature out there. Only a handful of people have that, and I think it's going to be some time before that resource allocation in a dynamic manner that's ongoing and application aware that you know, speeds up and speeds down. You know, that's going to take some time to proliferate. To the earlier point, we're probably going to, you know, overestimate the early adoption, but underestimate the long-term impact of the opportunity.
Okay.
The only thing I would add is I would say that none of these new services really happen in isolation from the portfolio you have today and the operation environment you have today. And we see a lot of work and programs around OSS transformation. And my hope is that we won't perpetuate the same build another OSS because we got to get another service out kind of a philosophy that we have that's led us to this extremely complex environment that we have today in every carrier around the world. We propose this service innovation framework-based approach, as I talked about, for the purpose of really consolidating current OSS for the network and service technologies that you're going to continue to take forward in your portfolio, but then to add these more rich, you know, on-demand type services in conjunction with them. I really have a crystal ball on when that's going to be ubiquitous, but I think we as an industry have a lot of lessons about build the next OSS is really not the answer here. It's let's rationalize the OSS we have while we introduce these new services. Nothing is in isolation anymore, but that's what I would add.
So we are already seeing dynamic services in overlay environments. They may not be necessarily being provided by service providers, but they're virtual service providers out there that are providing overlays that are completely controlled by a user portal, and the technology underneath may vary, but the bottom line is that they're already out there. I think one of the things that service providers need to be considering is that, you know, that is going to be competition in the future. What we're slightly further behind in is actually dynamic services that are impacting the actual edge of the network and reconfiguring the devices within the network itself. So changing the QoS and that kind of stuff. But Ethernet is an ideal medium for that. It's very high speed. It has the ability to be software controlled. So it's the ideal medium to provide you know, programmable services, and we're beginning to see them, and that will increase over time.
Okay. I was thinking about one of the slides that Mark Halbfinger had shared dealing with the IT and engineering, basically the BSS and OSS. And I wanted to ask the operators, from your point of view, are there particular, beyond the technical challenges, are there particular internal business challenges that you need to deal with when you think about this much more dynamic services environment and being able to leverage SDN and NFV?
Maybe there's a couple questions in there. I mean, the business challenges are real, and it's about the commercialization of and understanding how you do business in what is effectively a new paradigm. As it relates to network and IT, we've actually taken the step of putting network and IT together. And so we are moving faster because we see that they blend so much, and you can't do one without the other, and it really isn't the interface anymore so much as sorting out how to put them together. So we're very much on the page of those two functions belong together.
Okay. Don, how about you from a COO point?
Yeah, I think Simon touched on it, and certainly in the short run, there's the opportunity, as I said, to take advantage of some of the inherent capabilities in the technology today. From a control standpoint, yeah, I think that's a great opportunity from the standpoint of the notion of software-defined networking, and really the ability to either control directly through a change order, or ideally, or ultimately maybe through a customer enacted portal command. So yeah, it's challenging. It is being done in small scale, and like everything, it's getting the ability to scale that. And as I mentioned before, the other challenge you have is ubiquity, right? Being in this transitionary phase of legacy technology with emerging technology certainly creates its challenges as well, to make sure that an offer some along those lines has the ability to make enough of an impact across your portfolio that it's worth the investment. But we all see it coming, and I do believe 2 years. I think you'll see it more ubiquitous than perhaps today.
Okay, great.
I would just add on from my perspective, the two key challenges that we're facing today are, the business model of dynamic and how you monetize that properly. That's in both the customer's benefit and is rational from an investment standpoint. And couple that with the ubiquity concept, where no one provider owns network everywhere. How do you extend that dynamic nature across where the customer is versus segmenting it to certain parts of the customer? So just making those two concepts marry up over time, which I think ultimately we'll get to, but we're not necessarily there yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I just add. I think that we definitely do see the customers that we call on from an OSS, BSS point of view are now definitely the IT organizations more than the operations organizations only. That consolidation and organizational change has definitely been happening in the carriers globally. We really encourage that. That means that we need to provide platforms that allow them to provision and fulfill and create services in a much more generic sense than for one service at a time, perfectly engineered, network designed, rolled out, in isolation of everything else. And so that's really one of the key drivers that drives our portfolio, is the only thing I would add to that.
Another question I wanted to ask the CTOs from the vendors, when you look at all the different standards initiatives that are out there, what would you say are two or three of the most critical ones for the industry to focus on as we think about this much more dynamic services environment? Simon, maybe you want to take it?
There are many, many different types of standards bodies, and I would throw in the sort of open source stuff that has sort of come along in the last couple of years, or has been around for many years, but has sort of is more visible to the service provider community today. I'm not going to give a specific answer here, but we need basically all of them. We need sort of open source efforts. We need efforts that actually standardize the protocols and such like. And we also need, sort of intergovernmental initiatives as well to make sure that, the world sort of keeps operating sort of in the correct fashion. But I think the challenge that we have moving forward is that standards bodies tend to be slow and we are in a world that needs to accelerate because, you know, we're primarily service providers here today, but there are people out there that are after your business effectively. They're after the business VPNs, they're after your consumer business, and any standards work needs to sort of take that into account. And, you know, we've got to move as an industry, that the vendors that provide the service providers and the service providers themselves as an industry, to actually compete with the competition that's out there.
I guess the only thing I would add is, you know, and I agree with what you've said, you know, completely. I would say, though, that just be cognizant of the telemanagement forum type standards as well that are around there for the purpose of, and they define SID. And SID is this basic underpinning this model I described today about product, service, and resource, and service component-based provisioning and fulfillment. And we think that that's really important, not just for Ethernet, but for the broader sort of community of services and service providers. And I would also agree with you with you know, Open Daylight and OpenStack. Those are really, really important, and we're focusing on those as well. Those are really important to our new customer, the IT organization, who has a lot more control than they ever had before.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate the panelists' participation, and thank you.
Thank you. Yes.